Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to reveal the invisible, frankly mind-boggling financial gymnastics hiding right there inside your wallet. I mean, think about it. Every single day, millions of us pull out a little rectangular piece of plastic, we tap it or swipe it, and we just walk away with our groceries, our coffees, or our new electronics. It literally feels like magic, right? But beneath that completely seamless split-second transaction is a vast, heavily debated, and incredibly complex global infrastructure. We're going to unpack exactly how that entire system works, how it evolved, and why the hidden fees powering the whole shebang have become the center of some really intense regulatory scrutiny around the world. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, building a global brand. Second, the four-party payment puzzle. Third, the hidden interchange engine. And finally, the cost of convenience.
All right, let's jump right into part one, building a global brand. To really understand the global payment system, we have to look at how these massive networks actually began and grew into the absolute titans they are today. And it's an incredible evolution. Back in the late 1940s, a few US banks just started handing out this specially issued paper that you could use kind of like cash in local stores. Fast forward to 1966, and a group of bankers meet up in Buffalo, New York to form a federation so they can mutually accept each other's credit cards. This became the Interbank Card Association. Just 2 years later, in 1968, they adopted the name MasterCard along with those famous interlocking circles of red and yellow. By 1979, the name shifted to MasterCard. So it started as this loose federation of banks just trying to figure out a paper cash substitute, evolved so successfully, so globally that by 2019, they literally dropped their name entirely from their logo. Today, those two overlapping circles just stand completely on their own as a digital-first icon across over 210 countries and territories.
But here is a stat that is absolutely going to blow your mind. Despite all this massive digital growth spanning the globe and processing billions of transactions, a staggering 85% of retail transactions worldwide are actually still made in cash and checks. I know, it's wild. As dominant as your plastic cards might feel to you, the global transition away from cash is far, far from over. There's this vast frontier out there that is still largely dominated by good old-fashioned paper money.
Moving right along to part two, the four-party payment puzzle. Okay, so because replacing that 85% of cash transactions requires a system that is incredibly robust, we need to really understand the mechanics inside the banking system itself. Let's start with a closed system like American Express or Diners Club. It's basically a simple triangle, a three-party scheme. You've got the cardholder, the merchant, and the scheme owner sitting right there at the top. And the reason it's so simple is because the scheme owner itself acts as both the issuer of the card to the consumer and the acquirer of the transaction for the merchant. The whole thing happens in-house. They collect all the costs, all the revenues, which means they can easily balance the system themselves. If they want to charge cardholders a little less to encourage them to sign up, they just charge merchants a bit more to accept the card. Boom, their books are balanced internally.
But open systems like MasterCard or Visa, they totally blow up that simple triangle and replace it with a complex rectangle, what we call the four-party scheme. See, to grow exponentially, these networks didn't want to go through the hassle of issuing every single card or signing up every single merchant themselves. That's too slow. Instead, they opened the whole system up, allowing thousands of different independent banks to participate. But by doing this, they split the relationship right down the middle. The bank dealing with the consumer is no longer the same bank dealing with the merchant. So when you buy a coffee, your bank and the coffee shop's bank actually have to talk to each other to settle that payment. In this open system, we've got to clearly separate these two key players. On one side, we have the issuer. This is the bank that actually hands you your card, checks your credit, and manages your personal account. On the flip side, we have the acquirer. This is the bank that gives the merchant their payment terminal and the actual ability to accept those cards. They are completely separate entities with entirely different costs and business models. Which brings us to part three, the hidden interchange engine. So here's the million-dollar question. What actually happens when your bank, the issuer, and the merchant's bank, the acquirer, are two totally different businesses? How on earth do they share the costs of making this seamless split-second transaction happen? Well, enter the interchange fee. You can think of this as the hidden engine of global payments. It is simply a fee paid by the merchant's acquiring bank over to your issuing bank for every single transaction. It's a transfer of value between these two banks that acts as this invisible mechanism keeping the whole global network humming along. Without this fee, the open four-party system would literally just collapse because the costs and incentives for the different banks would be totally misaligned. Actually, the South African Competition Commission's Banking Inquiry Report has this fantastic, honestly charming analogy for this. They state, just as a wedding requires two people to say I do, a payment-by-payment card requires one person to choose to use the card and another person voluntarily to accept it. I love that because it beautifully illustrates that interchange is fundamentally a balancing mechanism. It's perfectly designed to match two completely independent demands. You can't just have consumers wanting to use cards. Merchants absolutely must be willing to accept them too. If the cost gets too high for either party, the transaction, the wedding, if you will, just falls apart and people go right back to using cash.
So the crucial takeaway here is that because costs and revenues aren't just held by a single company anymore, this interchange fee is absolutely necessary to balance the scales. Think about it. The issuer takes on huge costs to acquire cardholders, mail out the physical plastic, and manage all that credit risk. Meanwhile, the acquirer is bearing the costs to provide the physical terminals and sign up the merchants. So the interchange fee basically takes revenue from the merchant side and transfers it over to the issuing side. Why? Because historically, it's been proven that the best way to maximize overall card usage across the entire globe is to cross-subsidize that issuing side. It allows issuers to give you, the consumer, free cards, cashback rewards, and travel perks, which naturally makes you want to use the card way more. And because you want to use the card to get those sweet, sweet perks, merchants basically have no choice but to accept it if they want to keep your business.
And finally, let's look at part 4, the cost of convenience. Now, while interchange might be completely necessary in principle to make the open system function, the specific way it is calculated and applied, well, that has sparked some intense regulatory scrutiny worldwide. The Competition Commission notes several very real dangers of abuse with this setup. First off, because interchange is a hard cost baked right into every single transaction, it sets an uncompetitive floor for merchant fees. An acquiring bank literally can never charge a merchant less than the interchange rate they have to pass on to your bank. So what happens? It acts as an invisible tax on consumer prices, because merchants just raise the price of their goods across the board to cover those fees. Furthermore, the report highlights that it manipulates merchant captivity. By pumping all that interchange revenue into consumer rewards, consumer demand for card usage spikes so high that merchants simply cannot afford to say no to cards, which radically reduces their bargaining power. And finally, the whole system inherently privileges super expensive credit cards, which carry much higher interchange fees, over cheaper debit card options, actively slowing down the adoption of more cost-effective electronic payment.
So I'm going to leave you with a pretty provocative thought to consider the next time you're standing at the checkout register. If high interchange fees drive up general store prices just to cover the cost of processing credit cards, who is really paying for those premium credit card rewards? Seriously, if you're a consumer paying in cash or just using a standard debit card, you're paying the exact same artificially elevated retail price as the person standing next to you using a premium, ultra rewards credit card. So are cash-paying consumers unfairly footing the bill for the perks of the wealthy? It is a fascinating, incredibly complex economic balancing act, and definitely one that regulators are going to be debating for years to come. Thank you so much for joining us on this explainer to uncover the hidden mechanics of our global payments.